Welcome to Raven Reports, where we explore the darkest corners of human nature. I'm your host, Elliot Raven, and today's story is one that will leave you questioning everything about the digital footprints we leave behind. This is the story of Melissa Keller and the mysterious explosion that rocked a quiet suburban community. It was a crisp autumn morning in the small town of Lakeview when residents of the Parkview Apartments were jolted awake by what many described as a thunderclap that shook the entire building. At precisely 7:32 a.m. on October 18th, apartment 3B erupted in flames. The explosion was so powerful that it blew out windows on the entire floor and caused structural damage to adjacent units. The blast was heard from nearly half a mile away, with some residents initially mistaking it for a transformer explosion or even an earthquake. But what makes this story truly chilling isn't just the devastation of the explosion itself. It's what happened in the digital world just minutes before the physical world was torn apart. At 7:27 a.m., exactly 5 minutes before the explosion, a post appeared on Melissa Keller's social media account. It read simply, "I'm sorry for everything. Goodbye." No context, no explanation. Just a digital farewell that would soon become the center of one of the most perplexing investigations I've ever encountered. For Melissa's 342 followers, it seemed like just another cryptic social media post, perhaps someone having a bad day. But within hours, as news of the explosion spread, that innocuous message took on a much darker significance. Who was Melissa Keller? And what happened in those critical 5 minutes between her online goodbye and the moment her apartment was engulfed in flames? The answers, as we'll discover, are far more complicated than they first appear, leading us down a rabbit hole of government secrets, advanced surveillance technology, and the frightening reality of how our digital lives can be manipulated without our knowledge. Let's start with what we know about Melissa. She was 28 years old, worked as a data analyst for a local tech company called Meridian Solutions, and had lived in Parkview Apartments for just over 2 years. Her colleagues described her as brilliant but reserved, the kind of person who would solve complex problems that stumped everyone else, but rarely joined after-work social events. She had graduated top of her class from MIT with dual degrees in computer science and mathematics, and could have worked for any of the major tech giants in Silicon Valley, but instead chose the smaller, less prominent Meridian Solutions in Lakeview, a decision that puzzled many who knew her potential. Her neighbor, Diana Wright, who lived in apartment 3A, had this to say: "Melissa was polite but private. We'd say hello in the hallway, but that was about it. She seemed like she was always lost in thought, always carrying these heavy books or typing away on her laptop. The night before it happened, I heard her pacing in her apartment. It was unusual because she was typically so quiet. I remember checking the time because it kept me up. She was still pacing at 2 a.m. I almost knocked on her door to check if everything was okay, but I didn't want to intrude. I wish I had now. Maybe things would have turned out differently." Diana's account gives us our first glimpse into something unusual happening in the hours before the explosion. But to understand the full picture, we need to go back further, much further, to trace the events that led to that fateful morning. 3 months before the incident, colleagues at Meridian Solutions noticed a change in Melissa's behavior. Her supervisor, James Harmon, reported that she had become increasingly paranoid about data security. "Melissa came to me concerned about some irregularities she'd found in our client database. At first, I thought she was just being thorough. That's who she was. But then she started suggesting that someone might be deliberately manipulating data patterns. She requested access to system logs that were way above her clearance level. When I denied the request, following company protocol, she became agitated. She told me, 'You don't understand what's happening right under your nose.' That was about 2 months before, Looking back, I wonder if I should have taken her concerns more seriously, but at the time it just seemed like she was overworking herself. We just landed a major government contract and everyone was under pressure to deliver. What exactly had Melissa discovered in those data patterns? Was it significant enough to put her in danger, or was it the beginning of a psychological breakdown?" The investigation into the explosion would soon uncover digital breadcrumbs that painted a disturbing picture of surveillance, conspiracy, and a young woman who may have discovered something she was never supposed to know. Detective Sarah Martinez was assigned as lead investigator on the case. A 15-year veteran of the Lakeview Police Department, Martinez had handled everything from homicides to complex fraud cases, but nothing quite like this. Her first challenge was determining whether Melissa had been in the apartment at the time of the explosion. The damage was so extensive that forensic identification would take weeks. In the meantime, she focused on Melissa's digital presence, starting with that final, cryptic social media post. Martinez discovered something odd. The goodbye message had been scheduled using a third-party posting app. Melissa hadn't actually typed those words at 7:27 a.m. She had programmed them to appear at that specific time, potentially days in advance. This wasn't a spontaneous decision. It was planned. But why schedule a goodbye for precisely 5 minutes before an explosion? Was Melissa setting the stage for her own disappearance? Or was she warning about something she couldn't openly discuss? And why 5 minutes? Not 10, not an hour, but exactly 5 minutes. Every detail seemed deliberate, though the meaning remained obscure. The detectives' next discovery only deepened the mystery. When examining Melissa's work laptop, which had been left at the office, they found that she had been researching a string of seemingly unrelated topics: deep-sea pressure vessels, industrial gas leaks, whistleblower protection laws, and something called Project Obsidian. Her browser history had been meticulously cleared, but the laptop's search index still contained fragments of her research. Martinez noted that Melissa had been particularly careful about covering her digital tracks, but not quite careful enough. Meanwhile, the forensic team at the apartment site made their own disturbing discovery. The explosion hadn't originated from the kitchen where gas leaks typically occur. The epicenter was Melissa's home office, specifically her desktop computer setup. Initial reports suggested a deliberate detonation rather than an accident, turning a missing persons case into a potential homicide investigation. The explosive device had been sophisticated, using components that weren't easily traceable to consumer products. This wasn't the work of an amateur, but there was no body found in the wreckage. Despite the devastation, no human remains were identified in apartment 3B. The heat had been intense enough to warp metal and incinerate most organic material. Yet forensic experts concluded that no person had been present at the blast site. Melissa Keller wasn't dead, at least not in that explosion. Where was Melissa Keller? Had she fled? Was she taken? Or had she orchestrated this entire scenario herself? 6 days after the explosion, surveillance footage emerged from a convenience store 30 miles outside of Lakeview. The timestamp showed 7:15 a.m. on the morning of the explosion, just 17 minutes before Melissa's apartment erupted in flames. A woman resembling Melissa purchased coffee, paid in cash, and drove away in a dark sedan with out-of-state plates. The image was grainy, but the similarity was striking. The store clerk remembered her because she seemed jumpy, checking her watch repeatedly and scanning the parking lot as if worried about being followed. She purchased not just coffee, but also several prepaid phone cards and a large bottle of water, items consistent with someone planning to be on the road for a while. Had Melissa orchestrated her own disappearance? And if so, why go to such extreme lengths? What could possibly make a promising young data analyst fake her own death in such a dramatic fashion? Detective Martinez decided to dig deeper into Melissa's work at Meridian Solutions. What she found would crack the case wide open and lead her into a world of government surveillance far beyond what she, or any ordinary citizen, could have imagined. Meridian Solutions wasn't just any tech company. They specialized in data analytics for government contracts, including some classified work. The company had recently secured a major contract with the Department of Defense, a project so secretive that most employees knew only code names and fragments of the overall objective. Melissa had been part of a team analyzing patterns in global communications, ostensibly for market research, but with potential intelligence applications. Martinez obtained a warrant to access Melissa's personal email accounts and discovered a series of encrypted messages between her and someone using the alias Watchman. The emails had been deleted but were recovered from server backups. In them, Melissa expressed concerns that she had identified a backdoor protocol being implemented in Meridian software, a protocol that could potentially allow unauthorized access to sensitive communications. The emails showed a progression of Melissa's realization, from initial suspicion to dawning horror, as she began to understand the full implications of what she had discovered. The final exchange took place 3 days before the explosion. Melissa, I've compiled everything. The patterns are undeniable once you know what to look for. I'm certain now that Project Obsidian isn't what they claimed. People need to know the truth. The data harvesting isn't just passive collection, it's active manipulation. They're not just watching. They're steering people's thoughts without them realizing it. I'm still not sure who they actually are, but I've traced the command protocols to government servers. This goes way beyond Meridian. Watchman, you're not safe. They monitor everything. Your home devices, your phone, your car, all compromised. Standard extraction protocols are compromised. Implement contingency echo immediately. Destroy all originals. 72 hours. Use only the secure channels we discussed. Trust no one you haven't verified through the method I showed you. They've done this before, and those who discovered it have disappeared or been discredited. Don't become another statistic. Contingency echo. Destroy all originals. 72 hours. The implications were disturbing. Had Melissa discovered something so damaging that she needed to fake her own death to escape those who might want to silence her? Martinez spent hours researching Project Obsidian, but found almost nothing in public records. The few references that did exist were redacted government documents obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests by privacy advocacy groups. Whatever this project was, it was being kept deliberately obscure. 2 weeks into the investigation, Detective Martinez received an anonymous package at the police station. It had been delivered by courier with no return address. Inside was a thumb drive containing a video file. The video showed Melissa recording herself in what appeared to be a hotel room at an unknown location. She looked tired, with dark circles under her eyes, but her voice was steady as she spoke directly to the camera. If you're watching this, then the contingency plan worked. I'm not dead, but I needed everyone to believe I was. What I discovered at Meridian goes beyond corporate espionage or data theft. Project Obsidian is a sophisticated surveillance system designed to identify and track individuals based on their digital behavior patterns. But it doesn't stop at tracking. The system is designed to interfere, to subtly manipulate information feeds, to isolate targets from contradictory viewpoints, to essentially shape reality around specific individuals. I found this because I was tasked with optimizing the algorithm's pattern recognition capabilities. I was told we were developing marketing tools. That was a lie. When I realized what I was actually building, I began gathering evidence. That's when I noticed changes in my own digital environment. My search results became strange. My social media started showing posts out of chronological order, with certain topics either dominating my feed or disappearing entirely. Emails went missing. Files on my computer were modified without my doing so. They were using the system on me. The explosion was necessary to destroy the hardware in my apartment, devices that had been compromised and were being used to monitor me. The official investigation will show that I tampered with my own computer to cause the explosion, making it look like someone tried to kill me. In reality, I triggered it remotely after ensuring the building was evacuated. I checked and triple-checked to make sure no one would be hurt. I'm not a monster, Detective Martinez. I just couldn't see any other way out. I don't know who to trust anymore. The people behind Project Obsidian have connections everywhere. Law enforcement, media, government. That's why I've gone off the grid. The evidence I've gathered is attached to this video. It's encrypted, and I've included the decryption key at the end of this recording. Detective Martinez, I'm trusting you to know what to do with it. I chose you because your digital footprint suggests integrity. Your cases show a pattern of pursuing the truth regardless of pressure from above. I hope I'm right, because if I'm not, I've just signed my own death warrant. The video ended there, with Melissa providing a 64-character encryption key before the screen went black. The attached files were extensive. Technical documentation, code snippets, internal emails, and testing data from Project Obsidian. It would take Martinez weeks to go through it all, even with technical assistance. The video left more questions than answers. Was Melissa suffering from a paranoid delusion? Or had she actually uncovered something sinister enough to warrant such extreme measures? The detail and specificity of her claims were hard to dismiss, but the implications were almost too frightening to consider. A government program designed not just to monitor citizens, but to manipulate their perceptions and behavior through their digital environment. Detective Martinez took the evidence to her superiors, who initially dismissed Melissa's claims as conspiracy theories from a troubled mind. Captain Reynolds, her direct supervisor, seemed particularly eager to classify the case as a simple gas explosion, despite the forensic evidence suggesting otherwise. "Look, Martinez," he said during their briefing, "sometimes the simplest explanation is the right one. Girl has mental breakdown, accidentally causes explosion, flees the scene. End of story." We don't need to go chasing government conspiracies based on the ramblings of someone who might be having a psychotic episode. But when Martinez began investigating Project Obsidian independently, she encountered unusual resistance. Her requests for information were delayed or denied. Case files she had uploaded to the department's digital evidence system became corrupted or were misplaced. Her own notes, kept on her department-issued laptop, showed signs of having been accessed when she was away from her desk. And then came the anonymous phone calls, warning her to drop the investigation. "You're looking into things that don't concern you," said a digitally altered voice on her personal cell phone, a number that wasn't publicly listed. "Walk away now, or face the consequences." The caller knew details about her movements that day, where she'd had lunch, whom she'd spoken with, even what she'd been wearing. It was a clear message. You're being watched. Meanwhile, forensic analysis of the explosion site yielded surprising results. Evidence suggested that while the explosion had originated from Melissa's computer, it had been triggered by a sophisticated remote detonation system. And most importantly, the timing of the blast coincided perfectly with the fire alarm being pulled on the floor below, ensuring that all residents had evacuated the building. No one had died in the explosion. It was destructive but carefully orchestrated to avoid casualties. Melissa had told the truth about that much, at least. 3 months after the investigation began, Detective Martinez was approached by a federal agent who identified himself only as Wilson. He requested a private meeting away from the police station, at a park on the outskirts of town. Martinez recorded the conversation surreptitiously, uncertain of what to expect. "Detective, I understand you've been looking into Project Obsidian. I'm here to officially inform you that this matter has been classified as a national security issue. All evidence related to Melissa Keller and Project Obsidian is being placed under federal jurisdiction, effective immediately." "On what grounds?" "This started as a potential homicide investigation. We both know there was no homicide, Detective. Melissa Keller is alive, and she's in possession of classified information that poses a significant security risk. Her disappearance and the destruction of property are now federal matters." "So she was telling the truth about Project Obsidian?" Agent Wilson's expression hardened. "I'm not at liberty to confirm or deny specific programs. All I can tell you is that Ms. Keller misunderstood the nature and purpose of certain analytics systems she was helping to develop. She acted on incomplete information and incorrect assumptions. She's not a whistleblower, Detective. She's a thief who stole proprietary technology she didn't fully understand. Then why am I being shut down? If she's just confused, let me find her and clear this up. Because regardless of her misunderstandings, she's in possession of proprietary algorithms that have applications beyond what she comprehends. Finding her is now our priority, not yours. I suggest you focus on the many other cases that surely demand your attention." Detective Martinez was ordered to turn over all evidence and cease her investigation. Officially, the case of the Parkview apartment explosion was reclassified as an accident caused by faulty wiring, despite all evidence to the contrary. The report made no mention of remote detonation devices or the suspicious timing with the fire alarm. But Martinez wasn't satisfied with this conclusion. The federal intervention only convinced her that Melissa's claims deserved more scrutiny, not less. Against direct orders, she kept copies of key evidence, including Melissa's video testimony and the encrypted files. And she began her own unofficial investigation into Meridian Solutions and their government contracts, working nights and weekends, using personal resources rather than department equipment. She discovered that Meridian Solutions had received a series of classified contracts over the past 5 years, with funding increasing dramatically in the last 18 months. The company had nearly tripled in size, hiring specifically in areas of machine learning, behavioral prediction, and pattern analysis. Their public-facing work involved marketing analytics and consumer behavior modeling, but their government contracts were hidden behind layers of security clearances and non-disclosure agreements. 6 months after the explosion, Martinez was contacted by a journalist named Eric Leung, who had been investigating similar patterns of digital manipulation and surveillance for an online tech publication called Digital Eye. They agreed to meet at a diner outside the city, away from cameras and potential listening devices. Martinez was careful to leave her phone at home and took a circuitous route to ensure she wasn't followed. "I've been tracking cases like Melissa Keller's for the past 2 years, Leung explained, speaking quietly despite the diner's ambient noise. Tech specialists who discover something they shouldn't, who start asking questions, and who then either recant everything, disappear, or have some kind of accident. Usually there's a federal cleanup operation that follows. just like what happened to your investigation. How many cases are we talking about? Martinez asked, pushing aside her untouched coffee. I've confirmed 7, suspected at least a dozen more, always involving data analysts or engineers working on machine learning projects with government applications. They notice patterns that the system is designed to conceal, and that makes them dangerous. There was a neural network specialist in Seattle last year. Car accident after he'd been asking questions about data harvesting. A cryptographer in Boston who supposedly had a mental breakdown after discovering unusual traffic patterns in supposedly secure systems. A UI designer in Austin who resigned suddenly, moved to New Zealand, and now refuses to discuss her former employer at all. Do you think Melissa is still alive? Lung nodded slowly. If she's as smart as her record suggests, yes. She wouldn't have gone public with what she knew. That's a death sentence. She would have found a way to disappear completely. The explosion was clever, dramatic enough to create confusion, but controlled enough to avoid casualties. It destroyed evidence and created a smokescreen for her escape. I need to find her, Martinez said firmly. Not to turn her in, but to understand exactly what she discovered. If what she's saying is true, people need to know. That's why I contacted you. I think I might know how to reach her, but I needed to be sure you weren't part of the cover-up. I've been watching you, Detective Martinez. You've continued investigating despite being ordered to stop. Your digital searches, yes, I can see those too, show you're still looking into Meridian Solutions and Project Obsidian. You're either incredibly dedicated or incredibly foolish, maybe both. Eric Lung had been communicating with someone he believed to be Melissa through an encrypted messaging platform called Shadow Chat. The person never identified themselves directly, but demonstrated knowledge of details only Melissa would know about Project Obsidian and the inner workings of Meridian Solutions. They had arranged a secure method of communication using dead drops and coded messages, old-school espionage techniques that left no digital trail. Through this channel, Martinez sent a message to the person believed to be Melissa, asking specific questions that only the real Melissa could answer, based on evidence from the original investigation. 3 days later, a response appeared in a public comment section of an obscure cooking blog, the dead drop location they had arranged. The comment contained a series of numbers that, when decoded using the key Martinez had included in her message, confirmed Melissa's identity and provided instructions for further communication. What followed was a dangerous game of cat and mouse, as Martinez worked with Eric Lung to piece together the full scope of Project Obsidian, while evading the federal agents who had begun monitoring both of them. Martinez noticed unfamiliar cars parked outside her apartment building. Her mail showed signs of having been opened and resealed. Her internet connection frequently slowed or dropped entirely when she researched certain topics. Eric Lung reported similar surveillance. Then things escalated. Martinez's home was broken into while she was at work. Nothing was taken, but items were subtly moved, as if someone wanted her to know they had been there. Her personal devices began malfunctioning in strange ways. Calls dropped, messages disappeared. The camera on her laptop activated without her input. Eric Lung's office at Digital Eye was robbed, with only his notes and hard drives taken, leaving valuable equipment untouched. Someone was very determined to keep Project Obsidian secret, and they were closing in. 9 months after the apartment explosion, Martinez received coordinates for a meeting location through their secure channel, an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city that had once been used for manufacturing electronics. Despite the obvious risks, she went alone, armed only with her service weapon and a recording device she had purchased with cash from an electronics store 2 cities away. The warehouse was cavernous and dimly lit, with dust motes floating in the few beams of light that penetrated the grimy windows. Martinez moved cautiously through the space, her footsteps echoing on the concrete floor. A figure emerged from the shadows at the far end, a woman whose appearance had changed dramatically from the photos Martinez had seen of Melissa Keller. Her once long dark hair was now short and blonde. She had lost weight, and her posture was different, more guarded, more alert, but the eyes were unmistakable, intense, intelligent, and now haunted by months of living in hiding. Detective Martinez, thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't, but I need to know the truth, not the official version I've been fed. The truth is more disturbing than even I initially realized. Melissa's voice was soft but steady. Project Obsidian isn't just about surveillance. It's about prediction and control. The system doesn't just track behavior. It shapes it through thousands of small, nearly imperceptible nudges in your digital environment. What kind of nudges? The order of search results you see, which social media posts appear in your feed, the ads that target you, the suggested content, all algorithmically tailored, not just to predict your next action, but to influence it, to guide you down specific information pathways while making you believe you're making independent choices. To what end? That's what I couldn't figure out at first. Why would the government need such sophisticated behavior modification tools? Then I found references to something called social stability algorithms. Basically, predictive models that identify individuals whose behavior patterns suggest they might become dissidents, whistleblowers, or political activists. Once identified, their digital environment is subtly manipulated to redirect their attention, change their emotional state, or simply overwhelm them with contradictory information. That sounds like something from a dystopian novel, not real life. The technology exists, detective. I helped build it unknowingly. And the worst part? It's not just being used on suspected terrorists or foreign agents. The system is deployed domestically against ordinary citizens whose only crime is asking the wrong questions or showing interest in the wrong topics. Journalists investigating government overreach, activists organizing protests, even regular people who start showing too much interest in privacy tools or encryption. The system identifies them and begins its work, subtle at first, then increasingly aggressive if the subject doesn't respond to the initial nudges. How does it work in practice? Say someone starts researching government surveillance programs. Suddenly, their search results begin emphasizing debunking articles. Their social media feed shows more content about conspiracy theories, but not the legitimate concerns they were actually interested in. Instead, they see the most outlandish, easily dismissible conspiracies. The goal is to associate legitimate concerns with fringe ideas in their mind. If that doesn't work, their digital experience becomes increasingly frustrating. Emails don't arrive, messages aren't delivered, websites load slowly. The system can even interfere with smart home devices or digital assistants, creating just enough technical problems to increase stress and decrease motivation to continue the unwanted behavior. Melissa provided Martinez with documentation of Project Obsidian's full capabilities, technical specifications, testing protocols, and even case studies of the system in action. The evidence was comprehensive and deeply troubling. It showed a program far more sophisticated and far-reaching than anything that had been publicly disclosed about government surveillance capabilities. But as they were finishing their conversation, both women noticed something unusual. The abandoned warehouse, which should have been silent, had subtle sounds of movement on the upper level. A faint metallic click, the creak of old floorboards. They weren't alone. Without speaking, Martinez gestured toward a side exit. They moved quickly and quietly, but as they reached the door, bright spotlights flooded the warehouse floor. A voice on a loudspeaker echoed through the building. "Melissa Keller, Detective Sarah Martinez. This is Agent Wilson. The building is surrounded. Please remain where you are. We are not here to harm you. We simply need to contain sensitive information. Melissa Keller, you are in possession of classified materials. Detective Martinez, you are interfering with a federal investigation. Both actions carry serious consequences, but we can resolve this peacefully if you cooperate now." Martinez drew her weapon, creating a momentary distraction that allowed Melissa to slip through the side door. Federal agents rushed into the warehouse, but in the confusion, Martinez also managed to escape through a broken window, cutting her arm on the glass but ignoring the pain as she ran into the surrounding industrial area. She still had the recording of their conversation and copies of the evidence Melissa had provided. What she didn't know was whether Melissa had escaped or been captured in the chaos that followed. For 2 weeks, their secure communication channel remained silent. Martinez feared the worst. 3 days after the warehouse incident, Martinez was suspended from the police force pending an investigation into her unauthorized pursuit of a closed case and interference with federal operations. Her home was searched, her devices confiscated, but they didn't find what they were looking for. Before the warehouse meeting, Martinez had taken precautions. She had given encrypted copies of all evidence to 3 trusted individuals: Eric Leung, her former partner Detective Rodriguez, and her sister who lived in another state. If anything happened to her, the information would be released to multiple news outlets simultaneously. This was her insurance policy, and she made sure Agent Wilson knew about it when he interrogated her after her suspension. They sat in a featureless room at the federal building downtown, Martinez still wearing the clothes she'd been arrested in. Wilson as impeccably dressed as ever. "You have no idea what you're meddling with, detective. This goes far beyond one woman's paranoid theories." Wilson's voice was calm, but his eyes were cold. "I've seen the evidence. Project Obsidian isn't a theory. It's real, and it's being used against American citizens without oversight or accountability. The system protects people. It identifies potential threats before they materialize. It's saved lives by manipulating how people think, by subtly altering their perception of reality. That's not protection. It's control. Sometimes control is necessary for the greater good. You're a police officer. You understand that certain freedoms must be curtailed to maintain order. This is no different, just more sophisticated. Who decides what that greater good is? And what happens when the system is turned against people who simply disagree with those in power? Agent Wilson didn't answer these questions. Instead, he offered Martinez a deal. Her cooperation in finding Melissa in exchange for immunity from prosecution for her obstruction of a federal investigation. Martinez refused. "Then I hope you enjoy a lengthy legal battle," Wilson said as he stood to leave. "And I hope whatever evidence you think you have is worth the cost to your career and your freedom." "It's not about my career," Martinez replied. "It's about whether we want to live in a society where our thoughts are manipulated without our knowledge or consent, where dissent is algorithmically suppressed before it can even fully form in our minds. That's not America, Agent Wilson, and I don't think it's what you signed up to protect either." For a moment, something flickered across Wilson's face. Doubt, perhaps, or recognition of the truth in her words. But it vanished quickly, replaced by his professional mask. "We'll speak again soon, Detective." 2 weeks later, a bombshell story broke across multiple major news outlets simultaneously. Project Obsidian, inside the government's digital manipulation program. The story featured extensive technical documentation, internal memos, and testimony from an unnamed former developer, all provided by Melissa Keller through Detective Martinez's network. The revelation sparked congressional hearings, public outrage, and calls for transparency regarding government surveillance programs. Meridian Solutions stock plummeted as their role in developing the technology came to light. Several high-ranking officials resigned as the scandal unfolded. Agent Wilson and his team disappeared from the investigation. Martinez was reinstated to the police force after an internal review found her suspension to be procedurally improper. The federal charges against her were quietly dropped, though no official apology was ever issued. But the most important question remained unanswered. What happened to Melissa Keller? 6 months after the story broke, Martinez received a postcard from a small coastal town in Portugal. There was no message, just a simple drawing of a raven. The same raven that had appeared in a doodle on one of Melissa's notebooks, recovered from her office after the explosion. Martinez understood the message. Melissa was alive and safe, far from those who had tried to silence her. Perhaps someday they would meet again, but for now, anonymity was Melissa's best protection. The fewer people who knew her whereabouts, the better. The Project Obsidian scandal led to new legislation limiting the government's ability to deploy behavioral manipulation algorithms without strict oversight and judicial approval. Meridian Solutions was restructured under new leadership and abandoned all classified government contracts. Eric Leung won a prestigious journalism award for his coverage of the story, though he noted in his acceptance speech that many details remained classified for national security reasons, a reminder that the full truth might never be known to the public. As for Detective Sarah Martinez, she was offered promotions and special assignments following her role in exposing the scandal. She declined them all, preferring to return to regular detective work. But colleagues noticed she had developed new habits. She used encrypted communication apps, kept her most sensitive notes on paper rather than digital devices, and occasionally checked her electronics for signs of tampering. When asked about these precautions, she would smile and say, "Just being thorough." But the truth was that Martinez could never look at technology the same way again. Some experiences change you forever. Once you've seen behind the curtain, you can never unsee what's there. The case of Melissa Keller and Project Obsidian raises disturbing questions about the intersection of technology, privacy, and power. In our increasingly digital world, how can we be sure that the choices we make are truly our own? How can we know if the information we receive is presented to us objectively, or if it's being curated to guide us toward predetermined conclusions? These aren't just philosophical questions anymore. They're urgent concerns in a world where algorithms increasingly shape our perception of reality. How much of what you believe has been subtly influenced by the information you've been shown? Or, perhaps more importantly, the information you haven't been shown? How many of your opinions have been shaped by a carefully constructed digital environment designed to lead you toward specific conclusions while making you believe you arrived at them independently? The official story is that Project Obsidian has been dismantled, its capabilities permanently curtailed by new oversight mechanisms. But Martinez sometimes wonders. In moments of doubt, she finds herself questioning whether the exposure of the program was itself a planned operation, a limited hangout designed to satisfy public outrage while similar programs continue under different names, with better secrecy. After all, the technology exists. The temptation to use it must be enormous for those in power. And sometimes, late at night, Martinez wonders about Agent Wilson. Not long after the scandal broke, he was reassigned to an overseas post. Was it punishment for failing to contain the situation? Or was he one of the few within the system who had finally recognized that some lines shouldn't be crossed, even in the name of national security? Had he perhaps allowed certain pieces of evidence to slip through the net, making the public exposure possible? She would probably never know. But she kept the postcard from Portugal in her desk drawer as a reminder that sometimes, even in the darkest of circumstances, truth finds a way to emerge, and that there are always people willing to risk everything to bring that truth to light. As I conclude this episode of Raven Reports, I leave you with a thought to consider. The next time you find yourself going down an unexpected digital rabbit hole, ask yourself, did you choose that path, or was the path chosen for you? In a world where our digital experiences are increasingly personalized, where algorithms predict and shape our behavior, how can we maintain true autonomy of thought? Until next time, I'm Elliot Raven, reminding you that in the darkest corners of human nature, the truth still matters. Good night.